This is Tony T here from TonySpicks.com with our college football pick show here for Saturday. That would be November the 1st. We'll have all games from Saturday, FBS versus FBS. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks on our channel for myself and our team of cappers here at TonySpicks.com. Give us a like, a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. Then visit our site, TonySpicks.com. We're a multi-capper site showcasing top performers in our industry. Click the link to the hot cappers, get some to long-term passes. You see our top performers up here, guys like Sean Higgs for the year. You're seeing Justin up there doing great work. David Racy, DeAndre up there on the leaderboards as well. I mentioned Justin. Brian Biller has been red hot. Latest premium picks here. So the page with best bets and more will be locked and loaded for this card here on Saturday. And our promo code Tony T at checkout will knock off that 15%. The link is in the description to get signed up. So let's go ahead. Let's get this one underway. Duke and Clemson going off here on Saturday. Duke fell to 4-3 after a 27-18 home defeat to Georgia Tech. The other Blue Devils were limited to just 2 yards a carry and effective in the passing game. On defense, they held the Yellow Jackets to just under 5 yards a carry with 205 yards passing for 9.8 yards per pass attempt. Gary Mensah here, 32 of 44 passing for 373 yards with 2 touchdowns. Clemson 3-4 after a 35-24 home defeat to SMU. The Tigers were held to 35 rushing yards with good movement in the passing game. They allowed 5 yards per rush to the Mustangs with 290 yards passing for 6.7 yards per pass attempt. Cade Klubnik in the game missed due to his ankle, but the team comes off the bye week. Blue Devils have wins on the road to Cal and Syracuse. Clemson has home losses at SMU, Syracuse, and LSU. Duke on the road is rushing for nearly 6 yards a carry and getting great work at the quarterback position. They are defending the run well away from home. Tigers have struggled to get points on their home field and rush for 3.2 yards a carry. They are allowing 259 yards passing per game at home. Duke 8-5 to the spread on the road. Clemson 4-8 to the spread as home favorite. Pick here at Duke plus 3.5. Vanderbilt in Texas going off here on Saturday. Vanderbilt now 7-1 after a 17-10 home victory. That one came against Missouri. The Commodores were limited in the passing game and rushed for 136 yards for 5.2 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 170 rushing yards for 4.1 yards a carry with 5.6 yards per pass attempt. Diego Pavia, 10 of 19 passes for 129 yards with a pick. Texas 6-2 after a 45-38 road victory in overtime at Mississippi State. Longhorns rushed for only 2.2 yards a carry, but effective in the passing game. They held the Bulldogs to 1.5 yards a carry with 382 yards passing for 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Arch Manning is in his concussion protocol. Matthew Caldwell went 1 of 1 for 10 yards in relief and has seen limited action this season. He played in 9 games with Troy last year, 63% completion rate, 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Vanderbilt's lone loss came at Alabama by 16. Texas' home loss came by 7 to Ohio State. Looks respectable now, the way Ohio State's playing. Vanderbilt on the road against the SEC is allowing 72% completions for 291 yards passing and 9 yards per pass attempt. They have been inefficient in the passing game away from home. Texas has movement in the passing game at home against the conference and hold opponents at 2.6 yards per rush. Longhorns are 4-1 to the spread at home against winning teams. Pick here Texas -1. Buffalo and Bowling Green going off on Saturday. Buffalo fell to 4-4 after their 24-16 home defeat to Akron. The Bulls were limited to 2.7 yards per rush, but moved the ball effectively through the air. They held the Zips to 2.3 yards per rush with 230 yards passing for 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Jaquan Roberson here, 23 of 36 passing for 266 yards with a touchdown and 4 picks. Bowling Green drops to 3-5 after a 24-21 road defeat at Kent. The Falcons rushed for 207 yards for 4.1 yards a carry. They allowed 4.4 yards per rush to the Golden Flashes with 172 yards passing for 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Drew Pine was injured in the game and was carted off the field with an ankle injury. Burton May, 12 of 22 passing for 142 yards and a touchdown. He had a rushing score. The Bulls on the road against the MAC getting good work at quarterback. They limit teams on the road to 3.4 yards a carry and 58% completion rate. The Falcons at home against the conference rushing for only 3 yards a carry and passing for only 159 yards. At home, they allowed conference foes 9.6 yards per pass attempt. The Bulls 3-0 to the spread on the road when lying between +3 and -3. Bowling Green 0-4 the spread at home, favorite of 7 or fewer points. Pick here Buffalo +1.5. Miami and SMU going off here on Saturday. All right, we got Miami here at 6-1 after a 42-7 home victory against Stanford. The Hurricanes had movement in the passing game and rushed for 199 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Cardinal to 2 yards per rush with 89 passing yards. Carson Beck here 21-28 passes for 189 yards with a touchdown. SMU dropped to 5-3, a 13-12 road defeat at Wake Forest. Mustangs rushed for under 3 yards a carry and were inefficient in the passing game. On defense, they limited the Demon Deacons here through the air and allowed 85 yards rushing for 2.4 yards per rush. Kevin Jennings here, 21-39 passing for 171 yards with an interception. Miami plays their second true road game. In that 6-point road win, they did allow 272 yards passing and struggled on the ground. SMU at home completing 76% of their passes for 9.3 yards per completion and a total of 274 yards passing. On defense at home, giving up just 3 yards a carry and limiting opposing quarterbacks at 54% completions. Miami 1-3 the spread as road favorite of 7.5 to 14 points. SMU here 7-3 to the spread at home against the ACC. Pick here SMU here at +11.5. West Virginia and Houston going off on Saturday. West Virginia fell to 2-6 after a 23-17 home defeat to TCU. Mountaineers were held to 1.3 yards a carry and had good movement in the passing game. They held the Horned Frogs at 2.9 yards per rush with 247 yards passing for 6.3 yards per pass attempt. Jalen Henderson has missed 3 straight games with injury. Scotty Fox, 28 of 41 passes for 201 yards with 2 touchdowns. Houston improved to 7-1 after a 24-16 road win at Arizona State. The Cougars were efficient in the passing game and rushed for 183 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. They allowed 4.6 yards per rush to the Sun Devils with 328 yards passing for 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Connor Wegman in the game, 17 of 22 passes for 201 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 111 yards and 2 scores. West Virginia has lost all 4 road games, including a 7-point loss at Ohio. Their 3 losses on the road against the Big 12 have been by 14 points or greater. WVU on the road allowing 5.3 yards per rush with 267 yards passing for 8.7 yards per pass attempt. They are getting poor rushing and quarterback play on the road. The Cougars hold opponents at 20 points per game at home with 3.5 yards per rush. The Cougars 4-2 the spread as home favorite. Pick here Houston -13.5. UCF and Baylor going off here on Saturday. We got UCF 4-3 after a 45-13 home victory against West Virginia. The Knights here were gained 578 yards with success running and throwing the football. They limited the Mountaineers to 79 passing yards with 131 rushing for 2.7 yards per rush. Taven Jackson, 23 of 34 passes for 277 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Baylor fell to 4-4 after a 41-20 road defeat to Cincinnati. The Bears were inefficient in the passing the football and rushed for 120 yards for 4 yards a carry. On defense, they contained the Bearcats through the air and allowed 265 yards rushing for 5.3 yards a carry. Sawyer Robertson in the game, 18 of 26 passes for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dating back to last year, the Knights have lost 4 straight on the road. UCF has struggled with quarterback play on the road and allowing 193 yards rushing for 5.6 yards a carry. Baylor defended the run and pass at home where they get really good quarterback play. UCF 2-5 the spread on the road, facing teams that average 31 points per game or greater. Pick here will be Baylor -4.5. Navy and North Texas going off here on Saturday, Navy now 7-0 after a 42-32 home victory against FAU. The midshipmen were efficient through the air and rushed for 397 yards for 7.1 yards per carry. On defense, they held the Owls to 2.8 yards per run with 381 yards passing for 6.9 yards per pass attempt. Blake Horvath, 8 of 12 passing for 83 yards. He rushed for 174 yards and 4 touchdowns. North Texas now 7-1 after a 54-20 road win in Charlotte. The Mean Green had a monster passing game and rushed for 146 yards for 5 yards a carry in the game. Defensively, they held the 49ers to 3.9 yards per rush and 295 yards passing for 8.2 yards per pass attempt. Drew Mestamaker, 37-49 passing for 608 yards with 4 touchdowns and a pick. North Texas has a 63-36 home defeat to USF. Navy offensively in conference rushed for 318 yards for 6.3 yards a carry and efficient passing. They have defended the run well in conference. That conference home loss by the Mean Green, they allowed 6 yards per rush with 70% completion rate. Midshipmen 7-4 the spread on the road against the AAC. North Texas 0-2 the spread at home, facing teams that average 200 yards rushing per game or greater. Pick here Navy plus 6.5. UAB and UConn going off here on Saturday. UAB improved to 3-4 after a 31-24 home victory against Memphis. The Blazers gained 470 yards with effective rushing and passing. On defense, they allowed 44.7 yards per rush with 243 yards passing for 6.9 yards per pass attempt. Jalen Kitna missed the game due to injury. Ryder Burton, 20 of 27 passes for 251 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. UConn fell to 5-3 after a 37-34 road defeat to Rice. The Huskies rushed for 4 yards a carry and effectively moved the ball through the air. They allowed 491 yards to the Owls, defending the run and pass poorly. Joe Fagnano, 32 of 48 passes for 344 yards with 3 touchdowns. The Blazers have rushed and thrown the football effectively against their non-conference opponents. UConn has a 6-point home win against Ball State. The Blazers 4-2 the spread on the road against the non-conference. The coaching change turned this positive here for the Blazers in their first game. Pick here UAB plus 11.5. Army and Air Force going off here on Saturday. Army fell to 3-4 after a 24-17 road defeat at Tulane. The Black Knights were efficient passing and rushed for 233 yards for 3.7 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 5.5 yards per rush to the Green Wave with 261 passing yards for 9 yards per pass attempt. Cale Holmes, 7 of 10 passing for 125 yards. He rushed for 155 yards and 2 touchdowns. Air Force 2-5 after a 24-21 home victory against Wyoming. The Falcons rushed for 330 yards for 5.9 yards a carry and limited in the passing game. They allowed 198 yards rushing for 5.5 yards a carry with 7 yards per pass attempt. Liam Zarka here, 3 of 8 passing for 33 yards. He rushed for 141 yards and a score. Army defensively allowing 21 points per game. They defend the run better than this opponent. Air Force defensively surrendering 5.7 yards per rush with 71% completion rate, 10.3 yards per pass attempt. They give up 37 points a game. The Black Knights 8-1 to the spread on the road on field turf. Air Force 0-5 the spread as the home favorite here of 7 or fewer points. Pick here will be Air Force here. Army here. Sorry, pick Army. Army plus 1.5. Penn State and Ohio State going off here on Saturday. All right, we got Penn State 3-4 after a 25-24 road defeat to Iowa. The Lions rushed for 173 yards for 3.7 yards a carry with really bad passing. On defense, they limited the Hawkeyes' passing attack but allowed 245 yards rushing for 7.5 yards per attempt. Here, Ethan Grunkmeyer completed 15 of 28 passes for 93 yards and 2 picks there. And we had Ohio State 7-0 here, 34-0 road win in Wisconsin. The Buckeyes were effective passing the football and rushed for 98 yards for 4 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Badgers to 3 yards per rush with 49 yards passing. Julian Sayin, 36 of 42 passes for 393 yards. Starting quarterback LR is out for the season, and the Lions here, they started back up for the second time. Penn State on the road against the Big Ten give up nearly 34 points a game. 6.3 yards per rush, 68% completion rate. Ohio State allowing just under 6 points per game. They rush the football effectively. They get great quarterback play. The Buckeyes have covered 9 straight with a push over their past 10. Penn State 1-4 the spread on the road, facing a team that averages 425 yards per game or greater. Pick your Ohio State minus 20.5. Got Rutgers and Illinois for Saturday. Rutgers now 4-4 after their 27-24 road win at Purdue. The Scarlet Knights had a huge passing performance and rushed for 184 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. Offensively, they limited the Boilermakers on the ground and allowed 217 yards rushing for 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Nathan Kalamaknis here, 19-27 passes for 359 yards with a touchdown. Illinois 5-3 with their 42-25 road defeat to Washington. The final Illini rushed for 138 yards for 4.8 yards a carry. Had movement in the passing game. They allowed 449 yards to the Huskies with poor work against the pass and run. Luke Altmaier here, 22 of 34 passing for 199 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. He rushed for 48 yards. It is back-to-back road games for the Scarlet Knights. They have a 19-point road defeat at Washington. Their defense has been poor on the road, allowing 5.6 yards per rush, 285 yards passing for 9.4 yards per pass attempt. Illinois had home defense well and got good quarterback play. They are 4-2 the spread as home favorite. Pick here Illinois minus 12.5. Arizona State and Iowa State going off here on Saturday. All right, we got Arizona State dropping to 5-2 after a 24-16 home defeat to Houston. The Sun Devils moved the football through the air and rushed for 98 yards for 4.7 yards per attempt. Defensively, they struggled against the pass and allowed 183 yards rushing for 3.8 yards a carry. Sam Levitt, 18 of 35 passing for 270 yards and a touchdown. Iowa State fell to 5-3. A 41-27 home defeat to BYU. The Cyclones gained 495 yards with success rushing and passing. On defense, they allowed 3.7 yards a carry to the Cougars with 307 yards passing for 8.5 yards per pass attempt. Rocco Beck, 24 of 36 passing for 311 yards with a touchdown and 3 picks. 3 straight losses for the Cyclones. Levitt is healthy, so the Sun Devils were skewed when he was out. Cyclones in conference is struggling with accuracy at quarterback. On defense, they allow Big 12 teams 4.7 yards per rush, 7.9 yards per pass attempt. ASU 8-4 the spread on the road against the conference. Pick here Arizona State plus 5.5. East Carolina and Temple, this one for Saturday. We've got East Carolina 4-3 after a 41-27 home victory against Tulsa. The Pirates gained 568 yards with strong running and throwing the football. They allowed 3.5 yards per rush to the Golden Hurricane with 251 passing yards for 6.1 yards per pass attempt. Caden Hauser in the game, 21 of 38 passing for 300 yards with 2 touchdowns. Temple now 5-3 after a 38-37 road victory at Tulsa. The Owls gained 180 yards for 5.3 yards per rush and were effective in the passing game. They allowed 3.2 yards per run with 296 yards passing for 9.5 yards per pass attempt. Evan Simon in the game, 24 of 35 passing for 267 yards with 5 touchdowns. Temple has a 1-point home loss to Navy. ECU was competitive at Tulane with the 7-point loss. ECU here on the road is getting great quarterback play. Temple rushing for passing the ball well at home. Pirates are allowing 284 yards passing with 7.7 yards per pass attempt. That's on the road. ECU 3-1 to the over on the road against the winning teams. The Owls 8-4 to the over as home underdog. Pick here East Carolina and Temple over 58.5. Louisville and Virginia Tech going off here on Saturday. Louisville now 6-1 after their 38-24 home victory against Boston College. The Cardinals had movement in the passing game and rushed for 317 yards for 10.2 yards per rush. Offensively, they limited the BC pass attack and allowed 116 yards rushing for 3.2 yards per carry. Miller Moss here, 15-27 passing for 187 yards with a touchdown and pick. He had 2 rushing scores. Virginia Tech 3-5 after a 42-34 home overtime victory against Cal. The Hokies were inefficient in the passing game with 357 yards rushing, though, for 6.2 yards a carry. They held the Golden Bears to 39 yards rushing with 286 yards passing for 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Tyrone Drones, 9 of 18 passing for 119 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 137 yards and 2 scores. Louisville on the road has one possession wins at Miami and Pittsburgh. Louisville in those games struggled on the ground and averaged 6.7 yards per pass attempt, allowed 265 yards passing for 7.9 yards per pass attempt. Virginia Tech is rushing for 5 yards a carry, and Drones likes to run. They have held opposing quarterbacks at 63% completion rate, and that's at home. The Hokies have been good at home on third down. Louisville 2-9 of the spread as a road favorite. Virginia Tech 7-3 of the spread at home against the ACC. The pick here, Virginia Tech plus 10.5. New Mexico and UNLV going off on Saturday. Mexico now 5-3 after a 33-14 home victory against Utah State. The Lobos were effective in the passing game and rushed for 224 yards for 5.3 yards a carry. Jack Lane here 17-22 passes for 183 yards with a touchdown. UNLV drops to 6-1 after a 56-31 road defeat at Boise State. The Rebels gained 476 yards and effective in the rushing as well as passing the football. On defense, they allowed 548 yards to the Broncos with poor work against the run and pass. Anthony Calandria, 18 of 30 passing for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns, also threw a pick. He rushed for 87 yards and a score. Mexico has dropped both road games in conference where they rushed for only 2.5 yards a carry and defended the pass poorly. On the road in the Mountain West, they allow 77% completion rate for 285 yards and 9.2 yards per pass attempt. UNLV at home rushed for 5.7 yards a carry and got great quarterback play. Defensively, they allowed 33 points per game on the road by allowing 461 yards with 6 yards per pass attempt. The Lobos 12-5 of the over on the road. The Rebels 7-4 of the over at home. Pick here, New Mexico and UNLV over 61.5. Old Dominion and UL Monroe for Saturday. Old Dominion now 5-3 after a 24-21 home victory against App State. The Monarchs had a great passing game and rushed for 149 yards for 3.3 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 4.1 yards a carry with 301 yards passing for 5.6 yards per pass attempt. Colton Joseph in the game, 21 of 33 passing for 305 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 62 yards in the game. UL Monroe now 3-5 after a 49-21 road defeat at Southern Miss. The Warhawks had a poor passing performance and rushed for 209 yards for 5.2 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 5.2 yards per rush with 248 yards passing for 10.8 yards per pass attempt. Third string Ian Graves forced into action due to injuries, hit 12 of 26 for 103 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. UL Monroe has lost and failed to cover 4 straight. That's by 15 points or greater. ODU offense away from home rushed for 5.6 yards a carry with 9.1 yards per pass attempt. UL Monroe in conference getting poor quarterback play and giving up 31 points per game. ODU 5-2 the spread on the road, facing a team that allows 5.9 yards per play or greater. UL Monroe 1-4 the spread at home, facing teams that average 5.9 yards per play or greater. Pick here, Old Dominion minus 17. Notre Dame and Boston College for Saturday. We've got here Notre Dame now 5-2 with their 34-24 home victory against USC 2 weeks ago. Fine Irish were limited through the air but rushed for 306 yards for 7 yards per carry. On defense, they limited the Trojans to 68 rushing yards with 328 yards passing for 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Grayson James here 23 of 46 passing for 244 yards with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. Boston College 1-7 after their 38-24 road defeat at Louisville. They were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 116 yards for 3.2 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 317 yards rushed for 10.2 yards per carry and 6 yards allowed per pass attempt. Grayson James here 23 of 46 passes for 244 yards with 3 touchdowns and 2 picks. Notre Dame on the road rushed for 4.6 yards a carry with 326 yards passing for 10.5 yards per pass attempt. They have defended well away from home. BC defense in the past month allowing 41 points per game with 5.7 yards per pass attempt and 290 yards passing for 8.5 yards per pass attempt. They are getting outscored by 25 points in this period. Fine Irish 12-3 of the spread as a road favorite. Pick here Notre Dame minus 28.5. Indiana and Maryland for Saturday. Indiana 8-0 after a 56-6 home victory against UCLA. The Hoosiers gained 475 yards and were effective in the run and pass. They limited the Bruins to 3.5 yards per carry and 118 yards passing for 4 yards per carry. Francisco Mendoza, 15-22, passing for 168 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. He rushed for 45 yards and a score. Maryland fell to 4-3 after a 20-17 road defeat at UCLA 2 weeks ago. The Terrapins were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 127 yards for 4.9 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Bruins by the air and allowed 193 yards rushing for 5.5 yards a carry. Malik Washington in the game, 23 of 48 passes for 210 yards with a touchdown and pick. He rushed for 67 yards. Maryland 1-3 against the Big Ten. In those games, they struggled on the ground and with quarterback play. On defense in conference, they allowed 248 yards passing per game with 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Indiana has a 10-point road win at Oregon. Indiana against a conference averaging 41 points per game with great quarterback play and 72% completion rate for 7.4 yards per pass attempt. They have defended well against the Big Ten. Hoosiers 3-1 to the spread as road favorite. Pick here Indiana minus 21.5. Fresno State and Boise State, this one for Saturday. Fresno State fell to 5-3 after a 23-0 home defeat to San Diego State. The Bulldogs were held to 2 yards per rush with ineffective quarterback play. On defense, they contained the Aztecs' passing game with 208 yards rushing for 4.5 yards a carry. Carson Conklin in the game, 20 of 42 passes for 182 yards and 2 interceptions. Boise State now 6-2 after a 24-3 road win at Nevada. The Broncos rushed for 134 yards with 2.7 yards per carry and had movement in the passing game. On defense, they limited the Wolfpack passing game and allowed 101 yards rushing for 4.2 yards a carry. Max Madsen in the game, 15-28 passing for 174 yards with a pick. Broncos have pounded teams at home. They rushed for 5 yards a carry and with 260 yards passing for 7.9 yards per pass attempt. Defend the pass well at home. Fresno State has failed to cover both conference games on the road. Offensively on the road, they're running for just under 3 yards a carry and give up 35 points a game. The Bulldogs have failed to cover 4 straight. Boise State has not missed a spread coverage since their opening loss. Pick here, Boise State minus 17.5. Louisiana and South Alabama going off here on Saturday. All right, we got South Alabama, the home team. Louisiana 2-6 after a 35-23 road defeat at Troy. The Raging Cajuns had movement in the passing game, but here just rushed for 184 yards for 4.4 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 4.2 yards per rush with 180 yards passing for 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Lunch Winfield in the game, 12-22 passing for 187 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. He rushed for 139 yards in the game. South Alabama now 2-6 with their 38-31 road win at Georgia State. The Jaguars were effective through the air and rushed for 108 yards for 4 yards per carry. They allowed 199 yards rushing to the Panthers for 5.5 yards per carry, along with 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Bishop Davenport in the game, 16-22 passes for 280 yards with 2 touchdowns. South Alabama has lost every home game against FBS opponents. Louisiana has lost all 4 road games. The Jaguars against the conference allowing 5.2 yards per run, and Louisiana against the Sun Belt rushing for 4.3 yards a carry and averaging 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Raging Cajuns 6-3 to the spread as a road underdog. South Alabama 5-9 to the spread as home favorite. Pick here Louisiana +4. Delaware and Liberty for Saturday. Delaware now 4-3 after a 31-28 home victory against Middle Tennessee State. The Blue Hens, moved the football through the air and rushed for 79 yards for 2.2 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 4.7 yards per rush to the Blue Raiders with 281 yards passing for 5.6 yards per pass attempt. Nick Minasucci, 27-42 passing for 276 yards with 4 touchdowns. Liberty now 3-4 after a 30-27 home victory against New Mexico State. The Flames were limited through the air and rushed for 114 yards for 3.8 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 146 yards of rushing, about 4 yards a carry with 6.5 yards per pass attempt. Ethan Vasco, 20 of 30 passing for 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. Delaware getting good quarterback play on the road and on defense, holding opposing quarterbacks at 6.7 yards per pass attempt. Liberty's gotten poor quarterback play at home and surrendered 5.2 yards per rush. The Flames 7-9 the spread as home favorite. Pick here Delaware plus 3.5. Michigan State and Minnesota, this one for Saturday. Michigan State fell to 3-5 after a 31-20 home defeat to Michigan. Spartans were limited through the air and rushed for 115 yards for 3 yards a carry. They held the Wolverines at 86 passing yards, but 276 yards rushing for 5.6 yards a carry. Aiden Childs, 14-28 passing for 130 yards. Minnesota sits at 5-3 after a 41-3 home road defeat in Iowa. The Golden Gophers rushed for 24 yards and had a poor passing game. On defense, they allowed 3.7 yards per rush of the Hawkeyes with 141 yards passing for 7 yards per pass attempt. Drake Lindsey in the game, 16-28 passes for 109 yards and 3 interceptions. Minnesota has won all 3 Big Ten games at home. Michigan State has lost all 3 road games by 11 or greater points. Michigan State rushing here for 2.9 yards to carry on the road, and on defense getting up 40 points a game with 5 yards per rush and 9.7 yards per pass attempt. Golden Gophers have defended well at home, allowing 3.2 yards per rush and 5.6 yards per pass attempt, and getting pretty good quarterback play. Golden Gophers 7-4 to the spread as home favorite. Pick here in Minnesota -3. New Mexico State and Western Kentucky. This one going off here on Saturday. New Mexico State fell to 3-4 after a 24-17 home defeat to Missouri State. The Aggies had some movement in the passing game and rushed for 82 yards for 3.3 yards per carry. They held the Bears to 3.9 yards a rush and 282 yards passing for 6.4 yards per pass attempt. Logan 5 here, 22 of 34 passes for 207 yards with a touchdown and 4 picks. Western Kentucky here 6-2 after their 28-27 road victory at Louisiana Tech. Hilltoppers had movement in the passing game and rushed for 113 yards for 3 yards a carry. They held the Bulldogs to 2.9 yards per rush on the ground, but 340 yards passing for 7.4 yards per pass attempt. Starter Maverick McIver is doubtful with a shoulder injury. Rodney Tisdale went 21-34 for 227 yards with a touchdown and a pick. He also rushed for 73 yards. A redshirt freshman quarterback expected to start for Western Kentucky. New Mexico State on the road rushing for only 2.3 yards a carry. Had issues with quarterback accuracy. Their pass defense has been bad on the road. WKU has defended the pass well at home. Big shoes to fill for Tisdale as the Hilltoppers averaged 310 yards passing with 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Western Kentucky, I should say, WKU, has struggled in run defense. Their quarterback situation is concerned. New Mexico State 3-1 to the under on the road, facing a team with a 600-750 win percentage. WKU 9-5 the under as a home favorite. Pick here will be New Mexico State and Western Kentucky to go under 53. We got Georgia and Florida neutral site game here on Saturday in Jacksonville. All right, here we've got Georgia now 6-1 after their 43-35 home victory against Ole Miss 2 weeks ago. The Bulldogs gained 510 yards with good work in the run and pass. They allowed 3.7 yards per rush to the Bulldogs with 263 yards passing for 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Gunner Stockton in the game, 26 of 31 passes for 289 yards with 4 touchdowns. He rushed for 59 yards and a score. Florida is now 3-4 after a 23-21 home victory against Mississippi State. The Gators had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 172 yards for 5.1 yards per rush. DJ Lagway, 20 of 34 passes for 280 yards with 2 interceptions. Neutral site game here in the rivalry in Jacksonville. Florida lost all 3 games away from home by 10 or greater points. The Bulldogs have wins away from home at Auburn by 10 and Tennessee by 3. Georgia in conference play getting great quarterback play and holding teams at 3.4 yards per run. Florida in conference allowing 267 yards passing for 8.9 yards per pass attempt. Florida 2-6 to the spread as an underdog of 3.5 to 10 points. Pick here Georgia laying the 7. Texas Tech and Kansas State for Saturday. Texas Tech 7-1 after a 42-0 home victory against Oklahoma State. The Red Raiders were held to 2.2 yards per rush, but effective in the passing game. They held the Cowboys to 3 yards per rush with 87 yards passing. Baron Morton expected to return under center. He's completing 69% of his passes with a career high 10 yards per pass attempt. Kansas State 4-4 after a 42-17 road win in Kansas. The Wildcats threw effectively and rushed for 140 yards for 3.9 yards to carry. On defense, they limited the Jayhawks' ground attack and allowed 137 yards passing for 3.7 yards per pass attempt. Avery Johnson in the game, 11-17 passing for 231 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 17 yards with 2 scores. Texas Tech hitting on all the key major data points on offense and defense effectively. Kansas State offense has been effective, averaging 37 points per game. They have been poor defensively at home in conference, allowing 5 yards per rush with 287 yards passing for 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Wildcats 4-1 in the over at home, facing a team that averages 425 yards per game or greater. Pick here Texas Tech and Kansas State over 52.5. Pittsburgh and Stanford going off here on Saturday. Pittsburgh now 6-2 after a 53-34 home victory against NC State. The Panthers were effective through the air and rushed for 106 yards for 3.2 yards to carry. On defense, they allowed 8.5 yards per rush to the Wolfpack with 284 yards passing for 6.9 yards per pass attempt. Mason Heinzell, 28-48 pass for 423 yards with 3 touchdowns. Stanford fell to 3-5 with a 42-7 road defeat at Miami. The Cardinals rushed for 2 yards to carry and were ineffective in the passing game. They allowed 199 yards rushing to the Hurricanes with 4.5 yards to carry and 205 yards passing for 6.8 yards per pass attempt. Then Go Bronson here, 9 of 21 passes for 50 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. The Panthers have been efficient in their passing game on the road and defending well. Stanford offensively in conference struggles with quarterback play. Their defense in conference holding teams to 2.9 yards to carry and 16.5 points per game. Hit 4-1 the under as a road favorite. Stanford 5-0 the under at home. Facing a team that allows 121 yards rushing per game or fewer. Pick here Pittsburgh and Stanford under 51.5. Virginia and Cal going off here on Saturday. All right, we got Virginia now 7-1 after a 17-16 road win at North Carolina. The Cavaliers were inefficient through the air and rushed for 59 yards for 1.7 yards to carry. On defense, they limited the Tar Heels passing game and allowed 145 yards rushing for 3.7 yards per pass attempt. Chandler Morris here, 20 of 35 passes for 200 yards with a touchdown and pick. Cal dropped to 5-3 with a 42-34 road defeat at Virginia Tech. Golden Bears had movement in the passing game but rushed for only 39 yards. Jared Sagapolotele, 24 of 39 passes for 286 yards and a touchdown. Back-to-back road games for the Cavaliers. Virginia on the road has been inefficient in the passing game, allowing 68% completion rate to opponents. Cal defense has performed well at home and passed for 256 yards. They are 4-2 the spread as home underdog. Pick here Cal plus 4.5. Mississippi State and Arkansas. This one going off here on Saturday. Mississippi State fell to 4-4 after a 45-38 home overtime defeat to Texas. The Bulldogs threw for effectively but rushed for only 63 yards for 1.4 yards to carry. On defense, they limited the Longhorns' ground game, allowed 356 yards passing for 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Blake Shapen here, 26 of 42 passes for 381 yards with 4 touchdowns. Arkansas drops at 2-6, a 33-24 home defeat to Auburn. The Razorbacks rushed for 2.8 yards to carry with really good work in the passing game. They allowed 230 yards rushing to the Tigers for 4.6 yards to carry with 150 yards passing for 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Taylor Green goes 14 of 22 passes for 268 yards with a touchdown and 3 picks. State in conference is getting good quarterback play. Arkansas against the SEC rushed for 5.2 yards to carry with a good play at quarterback. Both defenses have struggled against the conference. We'll take Arkansas here minus 4.5. Central Michigan and Western Michigan for Saturday. Central Michigan improved to 5-3 after their 38-13 home victory against UMass. The Chippewas had a performance through the air and limited performance through the air and rush for 279 yards for 5.3 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Minutemen through the air and allowed 116 yards rushing for 4.5 yards a carry. Joe Labas, 10 of 11 passing for 148 yards and 2 touchdowns. Western Michigan sits at 4-4 with a 26-17 road defeat at Miami, Ohio. Broncos rushed for 144 yards, 3.7 yards a carry in the game. They allowed 4.6 yards per rush to the Redhawks, with 260 yards passing for 8.7 yards per pass attempt. Brock Lowry in the game, 16 of 28 passes for 172 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 82 yards. Central Michigan against the MAC rushed for 5.5 yards a carry and get an efficient play at quarterback. They defend well against the pass in the conference. Western Michigan against the MAC struggles with quarterback efficiency and defends well. Pick here Central Michigan plus 4.5. Oklahoma State and Kansas for Saturday. We got Oklahoma State falling to 1-7 after their 42-0 road defeat at Texas Tech. The Cowboys had a poor passing game and rushed for 95 yards for 3 yards a carry. They limited the Red Raiders on the ground and allowed 282 yards passing for 9.7 yards per pass attempt. Sam Jackson, 9 of 19 passing for 48 yards. Kansas fell to 4-4 after a 42-17 home defeat to Kansas State. Jayhawks had a poor passing game and rushed for 110 yards for 2.8 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 3.9 yards per rush with 231 yards passing for 13.6 yards per pass attempt. Jalen Daniels in the game, 17 of 35 passing for 129 yards with an interception. He rushed for 44 yards and a score. Oklahoma State has failed to cover 9 straight against FBS competition. Oklahoma State on the road is averaging 5.3 yards per game, per carry, I should say, with poor running and miserable passing, averaging just 2.9 yards per pass attempt. They are allowing 51 points per game on the road and 345 yards passing for 10.7 yards per pass attempt. The Jayhawks at home rush for 5.5 yards a carry and getting good play at quarterback. Pick here, Kansas minus 24.5. Purdue and Michigan for Saturday night. Purdue fell here to 2-6 after their 27-24 home defeat at Rutgers. The Boilermakers were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 217 yards for 7.8 yards per pass attempt. Defensively, they allowed 3.8 yards per rush to the Scarlet Knights with 359 yards passing for 13.3 yards per pass attempt. Ryan Brown here, 11 of 20 passes for 117 yards and a touchdown. Michigan improved to 6-2 with their 31-20 road win at Michigan State. Wolverines struggled through the air and rushed for 276 yards for 5.6 yards a carry. On defense, they contained the Spartans' passing attack and allowed 115 yards rushing for 3 yards per carry. Bryce Underwood, 8 of 17 passes for 86 yards. He rushed for 26 yards and a score. Purdue has lost all 3 road games. They struggle with quarterback play and allowed 4.9 yards per rush, 7.9 yards per pass attempt. Wolverines at home rushed for 6 yards a carry and getting good quarterback play. They hold opponents to 9.3 points per game at home. Purdue 3-8 to the spread as a underdog. Pick here, Michigan here, minus 21.5. South Carolina and Ole Miss for Saturday night. South Carolina fell to 3-5 after a 29-22 home defeat to Alabama. The Gamecocks had movement in their passing game and rushed for 111 yards for 3 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Crimson Tide to 3.1 yards per rush with 253 yards passing for 5.9 yards per pass attempt. The North sellers the game, 18 of 32 passes for 222 yards with a touchdown and a pick. He rushed for 67 yards and a score. Ole Miss now 7-1 after a 34-26 road win at Oklahoma. Rebels had a really good movement in their passing game and rushed for 116 yards for 2.8 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed nearly 5 yards a carry, with 223 yards passing for 7 yards per pass attempt. Trinidad Chambliss in the game, 24-44 passing for 315 yards with a touchdown. He rushed for 53 yards. South Carolina on the road is rushing for 2.7 yards a carry and getting and averaging 15 points per game. They're allowing nearly 6 yards per rush away from home with 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Ole Miss at home put up 37 points a game with 305 yards passing for 9.1 yards per pass attempt. Defend the pass well at home. Ole Miss 12-6 to the spread at home. Pick your Ole Miss minus 12.5. Wyoming and San Diego State. This one for Saturday. We've got Wyoming now 4-4 after a 28-0 home victory against South Carolina. The Cowboys rushed for 212 yards for 6.2 yards a carry. They limited the Rams through the air and allowed 94 yards rushed for 3.5 yards per carry. Caden Anderson in the game, 16-24 passes for 154 yards and 2 touchdowns. San Diego State now 6-1, a 23-0 road win at Fresno State. The Aztecs were limited through the air and rushed for 280 yards for 4.5 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Bulldogs at 1.9 yards per rush with 182 yards passing for 4.3 yards per pass attempt. Jane Denigal here, 11-19 passing for 124 yards with a pick. San Diego State has covered 5 straight. Wyoming has lost 2 of 3 on the road with wins and with a win at Akron. The Cowboys are allowing 205 yards rushing on the road with 5.5 yards per carry. They're struggling with quarterback accuracy away from home. San Diego State rushed for nearly 5 yards a carry and getting great play at quarterback. On defense at home, they're allowing 8 points per game with 2.8 yards per rush, 5 yards per pass attempt. Here will be San Diego State minus 10.5. And Colorado, this one for Saturday. All right, in this one we've got Arizona falling to 4-3 after their 31-28 road defeat to Houston. The Wildcats were effective in the passing game and rushed for 112 yards for 3.6 yards a carry. Here on defense, they allowed 232 yards rushing for 5.2 yards a carry with 7.1 yards per pass attempt. Noah Fafita here, 24-26 passes for 269 yards with 2 touchdowns. Colorado 3-5 with their 53-7 road defeats at Utah. The Buffs were held to 1 yard per rush with ineffective passing. On defense, they limited the Utes through the air and allowed 422 yards rushing for 8.3 yards per pass attempt. Caden Salter in the game, 9-22 passes for 37 yards with a pick. Buffs have covered their conference games at home. The Wildcats have struggled on the road in conference over the past 2 seasons. Arizona on the road in conference, giving up 35 points per game, 67% completion rate for 10 yards per pass attempt. That is terrible pass defense. Colorado is getting good quarterback play at home. That's against the conference and has defended the run well. Colorado 10-1 to the spread at home in conference. Arizona 4-8 to the spread on the road against the Big 12. The pick here, Colorado plus 4.5. Kentucky and Auburn in this one for Saturday. We got Kentucky falling to 2-5 after their 56-34 home defeat to Tennessee. The Wildcats had good movement in the passing game and rushed for 148 yards for 3.9 yards a carry. On defense, they were poor defending the pass and allowed 3.3 yards per rush. Cutter Boley in the game, 26 of 35 passes for 330 yards with 5 touchdowns and a pick. Auburn 4-4 after their 33-24 road win at Arkansas. The Tigers have movement in the passing game and rushed for 230 yards for 4.6 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Razorbacks at 2.7 yards per rush with 268 yards passing for 12.2 yards per pass attempt. Ashton Daniels here, 6 of 8 passing for 77 yards. Of course, Jackson Arnold benched in the game. Kentucky has been pounded in their 3 road games against the SEC. They gave up 34.4 points per game with 9.8 yards per pass attempt on the road in conference play and struggled on the ground offensively. Auburn defensively at home, holding a conference foes to 2.3 yards per rush with 6 yards per pass attempt. Pick here Auburn minus 10.5. Washington State and Oregon State, this one for Saturday. We've got here Washington State now 4-4 with their 28-7 home victory against Toledo. The Cougars were limited through the air and rushed for 162 yards for 3.7 yards per carry. They held the Rockets to 2.5 yards per rush with 238 yards passing for 5.6 yards per pass attempt. Zevi Ekos here, 10-22 passing for 159 yards with 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. He rushed for 74 yards and a score. Oregon State 1-7 after their 45-13 home victory against FCS Lafayette. 3 weeks ago, it was a 39-14 home defeat to Wake Forest. The Beavers were poor in the passing game with 134 and rushed for 134 yards for 3.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 468 yards and really poorly defended the run and pass. Malik Murphy here, 9-12 passing for 69 yards. Oregon State has no wins against FBS opponents. The Cougars have covered 4 straight, including losses by 2 at Virginia and by 3 at Ole Miss. Washington State is completing 76% of their passes. Oregon State has struggled with quarterback accuracy and surrendering 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Pick here Washington State minus 3.5. Wake Forest and Florida State. This one for Saturday. Wake Forest now 5-2 after a 13-12 home victory against SMU. Even Deacons were inefficient in the passing game and rushed for 85 yards for 2.4 yards per carry. On defense, they limited the Mustangs' passing game, allowed 2.7 yards per rush. Robbie Ashford here, 4 of 10, passed for 33 yards and a touchdown. Florida State 3-4 after their 20-13 road defeat to Stanford. The Seminoles were effective in the passing game and rushed for 3.1 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Cardinal passing game, allowed 2.9 yards per carry. Tommy Castellanos here, 14-28 passes for 242 yards. He rushed for 33 yards and a score. The Seminoles have lost and failed to cover 4 straight. Wake Forest has covered 4 straight. Florida State in conference has struggled in pass defense and put up points on the board. The Demon Deacons have defended well in conference as they surrendered 5.1 yards per pass attempt. FSU here, 4-6 to spread at home against the ACC. Pick here Wake Forest plus the 10. Georgia Tech and NC State. This one for Saturday. Georgia Tech now 8-0 with their 41-16 home victory against Syracuse. The Yellow Jackets gained 544 yards with really good run and passing. They allowed 4.6 yards per rush to the Orange with 224 yards passing for 7.7 yards per pass attempt. Haynes King in the game, 25-31 passing for 304 yards with 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 91 yards and 2 scores. NC State falls to 4-4 with a 53-34 road defeat to Pittsburgh. The Wolfpack gained 159 yards for 8.4 yards a carry with movement in the passing game. They held the Panthers to 3.2 yards a carry with 423 yards passing for 8.6 yards per pass attempt. C.J. Bailey here, 24 of 40 for 225 yards and 3 touchdowns. Georgia Tech on the road averaging 5.2 yards per rush with accurate quarterback play. NC State at home against the ACC has put up really good offensive numbers but poor on defense by surrendering 35 points per game. Pick here Georgia Tech and NC State over 58.5. Oklahoma and Tennessee for Saturday night. Oklahoma fell to 6-2 after a 34-26 home defeat to Ole Miss. Sooners had movement in the passing game and rushed for 136 yards for 4.9 yards a carry. Defensively, they allowed 2.8 yards per run, but 315 yards passing for 6.8 yards per pass attempt. John Mateer, 17-31 passing for 223 yards with a touchdown. Tennessee now 6-2 with their 56-34 road win in Kentucky. The Vols were effective in the passing game and rushed for 3.3 yards per carry. They were poor in pass defense, allowed 146 yards rushing for 3.9 yards per carry. Joe Aguilar in the game, 20 of 26 passing for 396 yards and 3 touchdowns. Could be a playoff elimination game here. With both teams coming in with 2 losses. Mateer has not been efficient since returning from his thumb injury. Oklahoma in the SEC rushed for 3.1 yards a carry and inefficient in the passing game. Tennessee at home against the SEC putting up 38 points per game, 4.6 yards per rush. Great quarterback play. Sooners are 3-8 to the spread on the road against winning teams. Pick here Tennessee minus 3. USC and Nebraska for Saturday night. USC is 5-2 after their 34-24 road defeat at Notre Dame. The Trojans rushed for 2.3 yards a carry and had movement in the passing game. They limited the Fighting Irish through the air and allowed 306 yards rushing for 7 yards per rush. Jaden Mavia, 22 of 42 passing for 328 yards for 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. Nebraska is 6-2 after a 28-21 home victory against Northwestern. The Cornhuskers were limited through the air and rushed for 172 yards for 5.7 yards a carry. On defense, they defended the pass well and allowed 155 yards rushing for 4 yards a carry. Dylan Raiola 16-22 pass for 141 yards with a touchdown and pick. Nebraska's only home loss came to Michigan by 3. USC has a 2-point road loss at Illinois as a road favorite. USC's defense on the road allowing 5.1 yards per rush with 66% completion rate for 8.4 yards per pass attempt. Nebraska is getting great defense at home along with quarterback play. USC is 1-9 to the spread as road favorite. Pick your Nebraska plus 6.5. Arkansas State and Troy. This one going off on Saturday. All right, we got here Arkansas State 4-4 after a 34-24 home victory against Georgia Southern. Red Wolves had movement in the passing game and rushed for 266 yards for 5.5 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 3.1 yards per rush in the game with 208 yards passing for 8.3 yards per pass attempt. Jalen Raynor in the game, 24 of 37 passing for 216 yards with a pick. He rushed for 54 yards and 3 touchdowns. Troy improved to 6-2 with a 35-23 home victory against Louisiana. Trojans had a good passing performance and rushed for 165 yards for 4.2 yards a carry. On defense, they allowed 8.1 yards per pass attempt, along with 184 yards rushing for 4.4 yards per carry. Tucker Kilcrease, 16-24 passing for 180 yards with a pick. He rushed for 25 yards and 2 scores. Arkansas State on the road has notable losses at UL Monroe and Kennesaw State. The Road Wolves, offensively in conference on the road, rushing for only 3 yards a carry with inefficient play at quarterback. They're allowing 5.7 yards per rush, 71% completion rate on the road in conference play. Troy at home, in conference, putting up 33 points a game with 8.5 yards per pass attempt and defending the pass well. Arkansas State 1-4 the spread on the road against winning teams. Troy 4-1 the spread at home, facing teams that allow 4.75 yards per rush or greater. Pick here Troy -7. Cincinnati and Utah going off on Saturday. Cincinnati is now 7-1 after a 41-20 home victory against Baylor. The Bearcats were limited in the passing game and rushed for 265 yards for 5.3 yards a carry. On defense, they limited the Bears through the air and allowed 129 yards rushing for 4 yards a carry. Brendan Sorsby in the game, 13-21 passing for 111 yards with 2 touchdowns. He rushed for 85 yards on a score. Utah now 6-2 after their 53-7 home victory against Colorado. The Utes were limited through the air and rushed for 422 yards for 8.3 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Buffs to 1 yard per run with 102 yards passing for 3.4 yards per carry. Devin Dampier is expected to start after missing this game with an ankle injury. Utah has a 24-point home loss to Texas Tech. Cincinnati on the road against the Big 12, rushing for 5.5 yards a carry and getting really good quarterback play. Their defense has been poor away in conference, though. Utah at home and conference have gotten some poor pass performance. Bearcats have won 7 straight. Pick here Cincinnati plus the 10. Hawaii and San Jose State for Saturday night. Hawaii is 6-2 with a 31-19 road win at Colorado State. The Warriors had a really good passing performance and rushed for 134 yards for 4.8 yards a carry. On defense, they held the Rams to 2.5 yards per carry with 176 yards passing for 6 yards per pass attempt. Mike Alejandro, 26 of 38 passing for 301 yards with 3 touchdowns and a pick. San Jose State is 2-5 after their 30-25 road defeat at Utah State. The Spartans rushed for 194 yards for 7.2 yards a carry with good movement in the passing game. Defensively, they allowed 3.4 yards a carry with 331 yards passing for 10.3 yards per pass attempt. Walker in the game, 27 of 49 passing for 340 yards and 2 touchdowns. In Hawaii on the road, allowing 31 points per game with 4.9 yards per rush, 9.5 yards per pass attempt. San Jose State is getting good quarterback play at home and rushed for over 5 yards a carry there. Hawaii comes off the bye week, and it will be consecutive road games, but a bye in between. They won both road games in conference. The Spartans have a home win in their Mountain West game against New Mexico. Here, the Spartans 5-1 in the spread at home as a favorite of 7 or fewer points. Hawaii 1-3 in the spread, facing teams that average 5.9 yards per play or greater. Pick here San Jose State here -1. For more free pick videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Lots of free picks on our channel from myself as well as the team of cappers here at Tony'sPicks.com, making this a great channel to subscribe to. Hit us up with that like, that thumbs up. We greatly appreciate it. And then visit our site, Tony'sPicks.com, for our best bets, our premium places there. Of course, you'll find all of our press sets locked and loaded, ready to roll here for this big weekend. And our promo code TonyT at checkout will knock off that 15%. The link is in the description to get signed up. That will do it for now. I'm Tony T. We'll talk to you later.